I'm really excited to present our next speaker because she's actually my really good friend from Boston. So, and I have known her for a really, really long time. She's a licensed professional clinical counselor, and she's always has been passionate about helping people. I can definitely attest to that. She received a Master's of Arts in Counseling with a specialization in school counseling from the University of San Diego. And I can personally attest to her work in the wide range of settings, including schools, after-school programs, churches, juvenile justice, and private practice as well. Please welcome Ying Shiue for her talk, Mental Health and Practical Tips for Faith-Based Parenting.
Hi! Yay! Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I'm really passionate about mental health. That's why I kind of got into this field, so I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk about this topic, to share with you guys, for you guys to ask me questions and see how I can be helpful and supportive. I hope that you'll have practical tips to take away with you, and I hope that we're going to have fun learning and doing it together, because I don't want to sit here and bore you guys with stuff. So, hopefully it'll be fun, engaging, and we can all learn. So a little bit about me. I'm 33. I know I don't look 33. But thanks to my parents' good genes and Korean skin beauty care. So I'm 33, Asian American female. I grew up in the greater Boston area, and I myself do have major depression. I have suffered with major depression since I was in the 5th grade. It kind of was on and off. Luckily, in the past couple of years, I've really stabilized. I've really taken care of my mental health. I've really gotten to know what my triggers are and become very, very self-aware. And so that has really helped me. But definitely in my teenage and early young adult years, it really was a lot of touch and go. And I also have a lot of family members with ADHD and with undiagnosed autism. A little bit about me as a person. I really use a lot of empathy, honesty, and humor, both in my personal life and in my professional life. Those are really some of the values and the qualities that I really resonate with. And so, yeah, hopefully that shows. For those of you who are who is this girl and what qualifications does she have? I went to Boston University for college, majored in psychology, had no idea what I was going to do with it. I just knew that I wanted to work with people. I wasn't going to be one of those people that was stuck in a lab every day and not socializing. I was I want to be where the people are. So that's what I did. And after that, I took a couple of years. I worked as a children's ministry director for a church. I worked in tutoring services at a Kumon after school. For those of you that have your kids in Kumon, worked there. And kind of did a lot of soul searching and a lot of I don't know. And then I kind of took a gap year. I traveled to Taiwan and did study abroad for probably a semester and a half, really brushed up on my language skills. And then decided, hey, I actually really want to go into school counseling because I thought I wanted to be in school settings as a school counselor to provide support to students. Education is very important to me, as well as in my family. Growing up in the greater Boston area, we're very passionate about education and our sports teams. So that's what I took away from that. And so I went to University of San Diego for graduate school, specialized in school counseling, decided I did not want to become an adult just yet, and did another year and finished out with also clinical mental health counseling, and accrued my hours, and being the overachieving Asian that I am, got all of these credentials and whatnot. So first I want to go over what is mental health, because if we don't know what it is, then we can't really talk about it. So mental health really includes our emotional, psychological, and our social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we respond to stress, how we relate to others, how we make decisions. And it's important in every life stage. So our childhood, our adolescence, our adulthood. So mental health is important to you guys also, right? Not just to your kids, your teenagers who are like, I have poor mental health, I can't do anything. And you're like, come on, function, right? Like it's important for you guys as well. And it's not just one thing that causes our mental health to be bad or, to have a mental health condition. It's a lot of different factors. It could be biology, it could be family history, life experiences, chronic illnesses, use of drugs or alcohol, or feelings of loneliness and isolation, just like Dr. Ying talked about, right? Like COVID, everyone experienced that. No one was unaffected by it, and it really impacted all of us. So there are some misconceptions about mental health. One being, it's just a phase. They'll get through it, right? Like, everybody struggles. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's something that lasts a long, long time, and it could be on and off. But 1 in 5 adults experience mental illness each year, and 1 in 20 experience a serious mental illness every single year. So if you look around the room, right, we have a good number of people here. That means that there are people around us who are struggling and we may not know. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And also in our youth and teenagers, 1 in 6 experience mental health disorder each year. 50% of lifetime ones, they experience by 14. 75% by the age of 24. Another one is that kids can't have mental health issues. You're like, you're 5. Like, what's impacting your mental health? Like, you're 8. What big problems do you have in your life, right? But researchers have shown, and this was taken from 9 different data sources, and this was even before the pandemic really got going, was that children between ages 3 to 17, a lot of common ones were anxiety and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And for depression and suicide, that was kind of showing up a lot in older children and in teens. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in teens. That is a very, very scary statistic. And that's what the data shows. Number 3 is, but they still fill in the blank. So they must be fine, right? You see your kids and you're like, I don't think they have mental health issues. Like, they still smile, they still laugh, they still have fun with their friends, they're doing well in school, right? They don't have mental health issues. But I can tell you from personal experience, I was a high-functioning depressive person. I went to school, I got good grades, I was really involved in church, I hung out with all my friends, and my parents had no idea that I was at home crying every day, calling my friends, saying, like, I just don't want to be here anymore. What's the point of life? I want to die. Like, it just doesn't seem like it's worth it. My parents had no idea. And so just because you see these things in your kids doesn't mean that internally they're not struggling. For being that mental health illness or a condition is a sign of weakness. And I really like that in our age and society today that a lot of that is changing. And I would assume you guys are all here because you want to learn more about that. Everyone thinks that maybe, they must have problems, or maybe they weren't taught appropriately or whatnot. But let me tell you, for someone who has a mental health condition, no one wants to have it, right? No one wants to be crippled by anxiety that like they can't socialize with other people. No one wants to be in their bed every day being like, oh, I like can't get up, right? Like we look at all the happy people in the world, we're like, why can't we be like them, right? So people with mental health struggles, they're depicted as lazy or they're weak or there's a lack of willpower or discipline. They're just not disciplined enough. But there's a lot of factors that contribute to mental health. You could come from the most perfect family, the most perfect life, and still struggle. And recognizing that you need help is actually a sign of strength. It's a good sign. When you see people reaching out for help, whether it's therapy or friends or whatnot, if your kid comes to you and says, I'm having a hard time, I'm really struggling with this, that's a good sign because it means they want to get out. And number 5, they're just doing it to get attention, right? They must just be doing it for attention. But I give them a lot of attention. And it's like, most of the time, they're not doing it to just get attention. And if they are, then I'm going to ask, why? Why is it that they need this attention? What is the function behind this behavior, right? So if a kid is kicking and screaming, throwing a temper tantrum because they like want something, right? Parents are like, they're just doing it for attention. I'm like, there's a function to that behavior though. So we really have to look at what is the function of the behavior. 6, struggling is normal. Struggling is a part of life, and they should learn. And I would agree with that. Struggling is a part of life. We all struggle. And I think that through struggling, right, we build character. We build resiliency. And I would never want to take that away from anybody, because that's how they learn, that's how they grow. But I have to look at suffering. If they're struggling, I don't want to bail them out. But if they're suffering, I have to look at that and wonder, okay, is this too much? Is it too much for them? So I would say we don't have to suffer. If it's impacting your life, your daily life, or your kids' daily life, right? If they're not able to fulfill the goals that they want to, if their daily functioning is impacted, that's when it becomes medical. That's when it becomes a condition that needs to be addressed. Just like if you had a broken bone, right? Like no one's gonna be like, oh, just walk it off. You'll be fine. Like no, you go to the doctor, you get a cast, you let it heal, and then you can walk on it again. And parents, you guys have an important role to play in that. Because sometimes kids don't know how much it's really impacting them. They're kids, right? They're like, maybe all my friends are struggling, so I'm struggling, so maybe this is normal. They don't know what normal is. So sometimes it's up to you, parents, to notice things. Say, hey, I'm noticing that you're having a harder time getting out of bed in the morning. I'm noticing that, I'm noticing that, you've been retreating into your room a lot more. I'm noticing that you're not hanging out with your friends as much, right? Talk to me about that. What's going on here? And it's not about judging them, but really about being curious. Why is this happening? Talk to me about it. So I'm going to break this down to children and to teenagers. So talking about children first, because children, it's more about some of the behaviors, right? They don't necessarily know or also always have the vocabulary to tell you that they're struggling or that they're upset. So you look at what behaviors do they have. If they have frequent temper tantrums, or if they're irritable all the time, if they often talk about fears that they have or worrying a lot, if they complain about headaches and stomach aches with no medical cause, right? So sometimes our bodies take on our emotions, right? There's somatic signs in our bodies when dealing with stress or anxiety. And then also if they're constantly in motion, they have trouble sitting still. Maybe even when you tell them something and they are looking at you, but then they're not like really listening, they're having trouble with that, and it's happening a lot. If it happens like a couple of times, right? But if it's happening like basically every time, right? That might be a sign that, something is not quite reaching them. If they're sleeping too much or too little, having nightmares, if you're noticing that socially they're kind of falling behind from their peers, or maybe when they're at the playground, right, they're not really interacting with other people at all, they're just kind of always doing their own thing, then I might ask a couple of questions about why aren't they playing with other kids and what's going on here? If you notice that they're struggling academically, or that there's a sudden decrease in grades, or they repeat things, whether it's verbally or behavior-wise, if they feel this intense need to check locks or figure out what's under the bed, then I might have some concerns there. In teenagers, they're a lot more verbal. And so some of these things I'm going to list, you're going to be like, but isn't that normal for a teenager? And part of it is, to be honest, right? All teenagers are kind of moody, and they're kind of irritable, right? You're like, that sounds normal. They're all angry. They cry a lot, maybe. But there's also other things that you can notice, right? If their daily patterns are starting to change, if they withdraw from their friends, if they're kind of doing things that they once thought was really fun, and now they're losing that joy and pleasure in almost all things, right? This is different than a change of interest, right? So I one time had this parent come to me and be like, oh, this kid has been playing piano since they were 3, and now they're 13. But I told them that, at some point, you have to find this passion for yourself. And I was like, they've been playing piano for a decade. You don't think that if they had the passion, they would have found it by now? Why are we making this kid play piano? She's like, he used to really enjoy it. And I was like, if he doesn't enjoy it after a decade, I don't think he's gonna find that passion. So it's not just a change of interest, right? If they become interested in other things, that's a good sign. It's if they start losing all interest in all things, right? They just don't want to do anything. Withdrawing, we talked about that. Academically struggling, more so than they used to, right? And some of that could be teaching style. Maybe the teachers are not teaching the style that your child learns best. And so I would ask them about that. I would ask them, do you like your teacher? Do you like the class? So if it's a class that they're struggling in, then I might ask those questions first. But if they're really no, I like the teacher, it's fine, then I might be like, why are all these grades dropping then? Excessive worrying about something and they have trouble letting go of it, refusing to talk about what's bothering them, even though you've tried as best as you can as a parent to make it safe. Signs of using substances, and also self-harm. So it could be cutting themselves, burning, bruises, because they're hitting themselves. So if you see that there are marks on your kids that happen, from time to time, that you're like, what is that? I would ask questions about it. Okay. So now that I've probably got you feeling oh my God, I'm really overwhelmed. This is really stressful, right? You're like, what do we do? Great question. I want to talk about how we have a faith-based lens around this, because you can incorporate so much of your faith and love and God's love in this. when I do my work, even though I can't talk about faith, I still do it from a faith-based lens. So these are the Bible verses that I really live by. So one is from Hebrews. It says, "Let us consider how we may spur one another towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing so, but encouraging one another, as all the more you see the day approaching." So in my mind, sometimes when I come across an issue, when I come across a problem, I think to myself, how can I encourage this person? How can I pour love on this person, right? What does God need me to say to this person? And sometimes that's going to be setting a boundary. And other times, it's just going to be listening. And other times, it might be saying something that really brings their spirits up. It's different every time, but I always take a moment to pause and consider, how can I encourage this person? What does God need me to say to this person right now? What do they need to hear? As well as in John, "A new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples if you love one another." So for me, I know I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect, right? I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. So when we talk about the 10 Commandments, I'm like, listen, I don't think I can do all of them, right? I don't think that I can be this perfect person that never does anything bad, never sins. We're setting me up for failure if this is the expectation. But Jesus came and he kind of took that burden away, right? He says, this is all I want for you, is to love each other, because the power of that love, people will wonder, and people will know that had to come from somewhere. And people will ask. And so that's what I live by. So what can we do? How can we incorporate this love, God, faith, in supporting our kids and our teens? I'm giving you 10 tips. Don't panic, okay? Panicking is not helpful. Your kids are already struggling, and if they see that their parent is struggling, they're okay, I'm feeling anxious, but then my mom and dad are feeling anxious, so who holds my anxiety, right? And if we look at when Jesus' disciples were in the storm, and they were like, oh my gosh, I think we're gonna die, waves are crashing and everything is happening around them, and they call on Jesus, they're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Jesus is like, chill out, I got this, calm down. So if you find yourself panicking over something your kid has said, take a moment, take a breath, don't panic. And there's help if you need it. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be there. Which brings me to my next slide. Be present. You care, and that matters. In the hardest moments in my life when I've lost somebody, right? Which grief is something that we all experience. We all experience grief at some point in our lives. And if you've lost somebody, you know, it wasn't about the big moments. It was about the small moments. It was about the little things. So sometimes I know as a parent, you're going to be like, I was there, but it wasn't enough. I'm like, but it was. It might not be in that moment. But when your kids are adults and they look back on their lives, they're going to say, but mom and dad were there. It matters. And you do have an impact on your kids. They may not admit it, they may not recognize it, but your words matter to them. Your presence matters to them. When I was working with families with autism, it was so funny because I had this preteen boy that I was working with in the mornings and his family. And that was 3 mornings a week. And then I had this young 5-year-old boy who I worked with every day, Monday through Friday, for 3 hours every day. And sometimes I'd be like, I show up every day, but what am I doing? Am I making a difference? And I remember one day, right? Oh, this is a phrase. I say don't you dare sometimes. As some, sometimes we'll be playing a game and I'll be joking around with them and they're, maybe it's like sorry and they're like gonna like knock my piece over and I'm like, don't you dare. But it's all a joke. It's all like fun and games. But I'm like, don't you dare. And I remember one day, the boy I worked with in the morning and the boy I worked with in the afternoon, they both said that to me in the same day. And I was like, oh man, they really do listen to me, right? Like, dang, they really do listen. I do make an impact. They never said that. They never said that phrase before they met me. So they listen. They don't say it. They don't admit it. They don't always recognize it. But your presence does have an impact. Your words do matter. 3, build your relationship. Be involved. Cultivate and protect the relationship that you have with your kids. That is the most important thing that you can do. Learn from your kids. Learn to parent them by being a parent to them and ask for feedback. Because any parent that has multiple kids know, I can say one thing to this kid and it works. I can say the exact same thing in the exact same tone to this other kid and they're like crying and crumbling and they can't handle it. And you're like, what'd I do? I said the exact same thing. Like, what happened? Every kid is different. You're going to have a learning curve every time because every kid is different, right? With your first kid, you're like, I've never done this before. I've never been a parent to this 2-year-old before, right? When they become a teenager, you're like, oh my gosh, I've never parented a teenager before. And even when your second kid comes along, you've never parented that kid before. You've never parented them in their preteen years before because every kid is different. So everything is a learning experience for you. And that's okay. You're learning on the job. It's the best life experience. But you also have to tell your kids that, right? Like, they don't know that. So you have to tell them, like, hey, like, how can I help you? What can I do to support you? And I want, as a parent, for us to consider what is our greatest fear? Because sometimes a lot of parenting comes out of what I fear the most. What is my worst fear? How are we on time? Oh, okay. Do people have some worst fears that they might want to share? Maybe? No one wants to talk about it. They're like, oh, that's too scary. Oh, no. I'll talk about my worst fear. I'm not a parent, but I know for me as a professional and as someone that cares about kids and teens, my worst fear is what I don't know. That's my worst fear. My worst fear is what am I missing? What don't I know? And so that's why I need to cultivate a relationship in my work with kids. Because if they don't trust me, if they don't like me, if they're not willing to share with me, there's a lot that I'm not going to know. So I have this one teen that I work with. She came to me because parents found her using substances, and they were like, you gotta go back to therapy. And they found me, and I started working with her, and I built a relationship with her. And it took some time because she doesn't really trust people very easily, but I got there. And, she'd come to me and she'd be like, I'm 17, I'm about to turn 18, and why are my parents so involved? Why do they have so many rules? I just want to leave. And she's like, when I turn 18, I'm going to get a roommate. Like, I'm just going to move out. And I could hear, parent voice being like, don't do that, right? I hear parent voice being like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous, And I had to set that aside because if I did say that, what happens? They shut down. Then they don't want to talk to me, right? So what I do is, okay, let's play that out. Let's say you did move out. Do you plan on having roommates? She was like, yeah, can't afford to live on my own. I need to get some roommates. I said, okay. And by the way, in this family dynamic, right, mom, dad, and younger daughter, her sister, they kind of get along, and she's kind of she's kind of like irritable and moody all the time. And so she doesn't always get along with them. But she was like, yeah, I'm gonna get some roommates. I said, okay. And now let's say that you have 3 other roommates, right? And let's say you get along with 2 of them. And it's not that you guys are best friends, but, you watch TV shows together sometimes. They're helpful with the dishes, with the chores, right? But there's that one that maybe they come in, they kind of say hi, but then ignore you and go off into retreat into their rooms, and they don't interact. And sometimes they leave the dishes without putting them in the sink or the dishwasher. She's like, oh, I don't think I would like that person very much. And I said, What would you think of them? She's like, I think they'd be a bad roommate. I said, She goes, looks at me, and I look at her, and I'm waiting for it. She goes, oh, I'm the bad roommate. And I said, yes, you are. So I didn't give her the answer. I led her there. Because what happens if I give her the answer? She's going to do the opposite, and I'm going to get shut out. Because there's this natural phenomenon with teenagers that if you tell them to do one thing, they want to do the exact opposite. And so I don't give her the answers. I guide her there. I lead her there so that she comes up with the answer on her own. And then I'm like, wow, you're such a genius. But in my mind, I'm like, I'm the genius. I did that. And it's been a running thing in our sessions, right? Where I'll be like, how's it going at home? She goes, okay, I'm trying to be a good roommate. I said, okay, what are you doing? She said, I'm trying to be nicer. I was like, okay, that's so great, right? And then other times she'll come in and she goes, they're just in my business all the time. Why can't they leave me alone? And I'll say, what happens if your parents always left you alone? What if they never got involved in your life at all? She goes, oh, I probably wouldn't like that very much. I said, why? She'd be like, oh, like, I probably would want their attention. I said, She goes, oh, okay. I said, cool, good talk. It's great. Listen to your kids. Don't judge them. Don't give your opinion. Listen and be curious, right? Ask them questions. It's not a debate. Like maybe, yeah, like, let's say they're doing something, right? And you're like, in your mind, you're like, oh, that is not the most efficient way to do it, right? I have a better way. In your mind, you're like, I'm the parent, I know better. Which you do. I'm not going to lie. You do, because you're an adult. But ask them about their process, right? Ask them, hey, I noticed that you put the zebra and the lion together. Tell me about that. Oh, they're best friends. Oh, okay. Right? That's okay, right? Ask them about their process. Hey, let's say you get a call from school and they're like, your son or daughter was missing from school. And you're like, oh my gosh, they did school. And your first instinct is obviously to hunt them down and grill them and punish them for missing school. Don't panic. Take a moment. Take a breath. Ask them, hey, listen, I got a call from school today. Said you missed your 4th period class. I'm not mad. I'm curious. Why'd you miss it? What was going on? And they might say, oh, my friend was having a really hard time, and so I was helping them. Okay. Listen, next time your friend is having a hard time, take them to the school counselor, right? So that you're not in trouble and I'm not getting an excuse absent having a panic of where you are. Okay, right? Or they may be like, I just didn't want to go and drove off campus and, wanted to watch like Mario Party. And then you're like, listen, we don't do that in this family. So like, thank you for being honest with me, but you're also grounded for the next week. And give me the car keys. Encourage emotional expression. If you are not expressing your emotions to your kids, you cannot expect them to express their emotions to you. And this doesn't mean that you're trying to get your kids to like be your therapist. Like, we don't do that. You're the parent, they're the child. But in a safe way, right? If you ask them, hey, how was your day today? And they're like, oh, fine, good, whatever. You can be like, I kind of had a rough day. Do you want to go get ice cream? I think I need that right now, right? And they're like, oh, sounds great. But you're modeling, right? You're modeling emotional expression. And you're letting it known this is a safe space to share your feelings. Mom has them too. Dad has them too. I have them too, right? It's normal. But if you don't express how you feel, they're not going to express how they feel to you. Apologize. You're not perfect. They aren't either. And you're the parent, so you need to model conflict resolution to them. Let's say you did panic and you were stressed, and then you ended up yelling at them, and you knew, dang, I probably shouldn't have done that. But you're the parent, so you gotta be strong. You can't show weakness. They'll take advantage. No. Later on, you go to them and you say, hey, listen, I'm not happy with what you did, but I also didn't need to yell at you, and I'm sorry. I'm gonna work on it, right? And you can also tell them, listen, I'm not perfect. Hold me accountable. If I'm yelling at you, tell me I'm yelling at you. Or if that doesn't work, because sometimes people are like, when people tell me I'm yelling at them, that makes me yell louder, right? Like, if that doesn't work for you, say something else, right? Like, give them a strategy that they can indicate to you when you're becoming too much, when you are no longer helpful and you are overwhelming them. Model that. Model the humility, the self-awareness, the expression, and the ability to self-reflect on your own actions. Because in all honesty, if you're not reflecting on your own actions, guess what? Your kids probably won't self-reflect on theirs. So when they mess up, when they cross a boundary that you have set, they're going to be like, well, I was right. And my parents never apologized, so I don't need to apologize. If you don't make this a common theme in your family, right, they're not going to pick up on that. And I'm going to wrap this up, but discipline, but never out of emotions, right? Consequences can always be dealt with later. But if you don't set boundaries for your kids, they will never know what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. What is right, what is not right. What is okay, what is not okay. Kids need structure. So you have to discipline them. You have to hold boundaries. And this shows up in Genesis 3 in the fall, right? When Adam and Eve have sinned, when God said he had one rule. Don't eat from this one tree. And Adam and Eve did it anyway. Did that change God's love for them? No. And also, there was a boundary that had to be set. So what he did was he still took care of them. He clothed them, right? But then he said, and he took care of them because, they were feeling embarrassed and ashamed. So he clothed them so they wouldn't feel that way. But he also said, hey, but you still crossed my boundary. And so I need to banish you. I'm going to put a flaming cherubim with a flaming sword to let you know this is a boundary. Do not cross. He didn't let them back in. Follow through with your boundaries. Be consistent. Because when you become inconsistent, that's when the kids are like, but what can I get away with? Let me see how far I can go. There's always exceptions, though, right? So this is why, going back to establishing the relationship, being curious, hey, why did you do this thing? You knew that this was a rule. I'm curious as to what made you want to cross it. What was going through your mind? I don't know. Well, think about it and get back to me. Because there's reasons for the things that kids do. They're not idiots. They're pretty smart. There's reasons for it. So give them time to think and reflect about that. Give them space to do that. And consequences can always be dealt with later. 9, pick your battles. I know with my parents, right? I get these messages. I don't know if you guys get this, but I always get these messages about what vegetables not to eat because there's some sort of health risk, right? So it's they're always scams too. But I get these messages from my mom being like, tomato, don't eat the tomatoes. There's something wrong with the current tomatoes. Don't eat them because they're bad for you, right? And then later on she'll be like, oh, never mind, tomatoes are good now. But celery is really bad, right? And I'm like, I can't. You're overwhelming me with too many rules and boundaries and things I can't do. And then you know what happens? I just tune it all out and I don't listen. Pick your battles. Figure out what is the most important, and everything else you can kind of let slide. And lastly, just love and accept them for who they are and how they're changing and how they're growing and who they're becoming, and affirm that because they need to be reminded. They need to be reminded of who they are. Oops. Celebrate them. Even if it's little things, right? Thank you for taking out the trash today. I love seeing your smile today. Our car ride home was really nice and pleasant, right? I loved our conversation today. I really enjoyed our time here today. Some little things that they're like, oh, it's nice. And it's not so much about what they do, because I want to move away from just things that they do, right? Getting good grades or, doing chores, right? Because those are all nice things. But just who they are. Wow, I watched you with that younger kid. And I watched how you, they were scared and you helped them. And that was really nice. You're a good person, right? Remind them of who they are because, man, when you're a teenager, no one could pay me enough to go back to the teenage years. This is a terrible time. And they don't know. They don't know who they are. So you got to remind them sometimes. What are the good qualities about them? What are their positive traits, right? And what do you want to emphasize as a parent, right? Do I want to emphasize that you have to get good grades? No. Maybe I want to emphasize to work hard. So if we're just highlighting good grades, guess what? They're going to be thinking oh, that's all that matters, right? But highlight, oh, I love how hard you worked, right? Even if they get a C, or even in a homework they're struggling, right? I saw you struggle, but I saw you stick with it. Great job, right? I saw that it was hard for you, but you kept going. I know you probably wanted to give up, but you didn't. That's good. That's how we build resiliency. That's how we build some confidence. Okay. And there we go. Thank you. for being here, for being present, for sticking with me. And
Thank
ask
you,
questions.
Yang.
Yeah.
Can we give her a round of applause, please? Thanks. Do you want to sit up here with me?
Yeah. Grab some chairs. Oh, they're back here.
Again, if you have questions, which I'm getting, make sure to do slido.com. Ying, can you, I saw the slide up there, but I don't know if you went fully into it, but could you just, because this is an important thing that I've been dealing with my own kid about respecting their boundaries. Like when they say to me
Stop, go away.
Stop, yeah, go
Stop
away.
talking. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's totally happened to me.
Yeah.
Like this past week, it happened to me. So what do I do?
You listen to them.
So I should just go away.
Yeah.
All right, can you expound on that just a little bit?
So listen, when you're setting a boundary, right, you expect them to listen and follow through. And typically, when they're saying, stop talking, go away, leave me alone, they're trying to set a boundary. They're saying, you're overwhelming me. They're saying, I can't handle this right now. That's what they're really saying. And to be honest, you continuing to badger them is not helpful and overwhelms them even more. So then that's when they go into shutdown mode. And then they also feel like, I can't advocate for myself because I tried and no one listened. So them saying, stop talking, leave me alone, go away, it gives them the opportunity to take some space. It gives them the opportunity to self-reflect. It gives them the opportunity to not panic, escalate. That's why it's important. So many times, Jesus went off, right? Jesus went off and he spent days in the desert, alone, away from the disciples. He needed that time to self-reflect. He needed that time to maybe perhaps talk to God or reconnect with God to process everything going on. He spent more time probably by himself than really he did with other people. We just don't hear or see that in the Bible because that's not what was recorded because he was alone. But it's actually good for them. The only times that I would reconsider that is when there are serious safety concerns. So if they are at risk and have prior behaviors of self-harm or suicide attempts, that's the only time that I would perhaps modify that.